Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Laurel Bongiorno. I'm the Dean for Education and Human Studies at Champlain College. And we at Champlain College are very pleased to be offering this multi-part series focused on trauma and resilience. It's my privilege to announce and introduce Dr. Kimberly Quim. Kim is the Wellbeing and Success Coach at Champlain College and teaches in our psychology program. She focuses on positive psychology, cognitive psychology, and also teaches our positive psychology and well-being course that she cleverly has titled Mindcraft. Kim speaks regularly across the country on topics such as trauma, resilience, neurodiversity, and mindfulness. Thank you for leading this webinar, Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Bongiorno. And also just a quick big shout out to the Champlain College community, because for everyone who was part of this, there's a lot of effort that went into this. So the brainy techies, for sure, and also our amazing team of marketing goddesses for getting it out there, because they did a fantastic job. And for those of you choosing to use your life minutes to be here for this extremely important conversation, thank you. And a little shout out to St. Mike's too, because they did quite a bit to get the word out as well. So, okay, so here we go. So 3 tips or points in 30 minutes. Feels like speed dating. Okay, so we're going to start with what is trauma and how does it differ from big stress? And then we'll get into complex trauma and sort of how this has is an expansion of the older idea of or concept of trauma as more event-based. So it's an add, not subtract situation. And finally, how does trauma relate to scarcity? So first of all, just so we all have an idea to make sure we're kind of on the same page, it's important to be aware that roughly 60% of adults have experienced some sort of trauma. Very important to know. So not just our students, but us as professors, valued staff, parents, grown-ups in general have experienced 60% of us some sort of trauma. Now, as far as college students specifically, roughly 3/4 of them, 75% of them, develop some kind of mental health issues by the age of 24, with the high majority of those happening during the college years. So, and I'm sure most of you are aware too that this current generation of young adults is the most anxious and depressed generation the United States has ever seen. This is pre-pandemic. And then we throw in the pandemic and it's even more overwhelming for them. Also important to know that, let's say it's roughly 2/3 of our young adults who experience anxiety and depression do not seek treatment. Very important to know, because that leads to our last psychology not so fun fact, that suicide is currently the 2nd leading cause of death in college students. Okay, so to begin here, this is kind of a simplistic view of the brain, and quite honestly, I get pretty excited talking about the brain. So for our purposes, this is enough, because we are focused on this area over here, this pink area, which is the limbic system. It's in the middle of the brain, very primal. It is emotional headquarters, fear headquarters. And so I'm sure many of you or most of you have heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. And now with the pandemic, or fog response, the limbic system, again, is emotional headquarters. Okay, and the amygdala, you may have heard of the amygdala. The amygdala are 2 almond-shaped parts of the limbic system that are the kind of the culprits that flip the switch on the threat circuit, which is of course meant to keep us alive. Okay, now over here, we have the prefrontal cortex, and this is our area of higher thinking, our metacognition, or thinking about thinking. So reasoning, decision-making, problem-solving, planning, impulse control is it also is that, in addition to this little list down here on the left. Okay, so in non-trauma circumstances, the limbic system does a really good job together with the prefrontal cortex of communicating, okay? So the limbic system, let's say one of our students walking downtown in Burlington when it's dark out, where they probably shouldn't be, and their cell phone is dead. And all of a sudden they're walking by a dumpster and they hear a sound. It might be footsteps, I don't know. Okay, well, the limbic system will immediately alert the student, like danger, danger, Will Robinson, danger, okay? Their heartbeat amps up, they're kind of hyper vigilant, they can see better, hear better, meant to keep us surviving. That's the point. Okay, and then the limbic system kind of runs it by the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex says, hey, wait, cool it. Let's just, milliseconds, this is happening in milliseconds. Let's just, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just, let's just slow it down for a second. And then maybe a second later, a rather obese skunk goes waddling out of the dumpster. And then the limbic system is informed that this is just a skunk. We can calm down now. And homeostasis is kind of brought back, okay? Now, in a trauma situation, there's a disconnect here. I'm going to go to that next. There's a disconnect here. So when the brain has actually experienced trauma, and the definition of this, we're going to revisit it shortly, is when the mind's ability to cope is overridden. So one person's big stress might be another person's trauma. And what happens when the mind's ability to cope is overridden is this disconnect. And then sort of from the rational kind of higher thinking part, the limbic system, emotional headquarters, is then left in charge. So the pink part here is the survival part of the brain, and the red part here is the learning brain. Okay, so here's a kind of the cartoon version here. Okay, so obviously the learning brain to the left here with the little graduation hat on is where we want the student to be. We want them to be accessing their learning brain. When a student is in learning brain mode, they are open to taking in new information. They're comfortable with ambiguity, and the learning brain is also able to kind of sit back or pull back and take in the big picture, which is obviously what we want in a classroom. Emotionally, students in learning brain feel calmer, and they're excited about what they're getting ready to learn, excited about the topics. They're having fun and enjoying the class activities. They also have a curiosity because they're not really afraid to make mistakes. No one likes that, but they're not really uncomfortable with it. And they think of mistake making as sort of part of the overall learning process. So this is obviously where we want our students to be. Now the survival brain, which is the limbic system, right, is completely different. The survival brain is focused on threat. It's not at all comfortable with ambiguity. It wants things to be spelled out in black and white, does not like gray. Gray's ambiguous. Gray makes them anxious. And emotionally, the student stuck in survival brain can actually be panicky and maybe a little obsessive. They're often afraid of getting things wrong. Again, not calm, not open to learning new things as much. They're really about box checking, more about getting it over with. Again, they don't like to make mistakes. And this is because they're afraid of exposure. They feel like they're in a fishbowl, and they're afraid of not looking smart in front of their fellow classmates. So typically, students stuck in survival brain are not as apt to raise their hands, not as apt to participate or lead a group or anything like that, because they're not confident in their ability to learn. Okay, so how do the learning brain and the survival brain interact? Well, here's the thing to know, okay? Survival brain will always, not a word I use often, dominate over the learning brain. And this makes sense because the survival brain is trying to save our lives, right? It's trying to save our lives. So think of it in a Darwinian sense. This is about perpetuating the human species. We are hardwired for survival. So the student's sitting there and they're getting these messages from the limbic system saying, if there's a threat, Jonathan, you better be paying attention. Forget what's going on in the classroom and up on the smartboard, whatever video that is. Like, we're in danger here. Focus, okay? And here's the thing. As long as a survival brain stays turned on, it becomes increasingly more difficult to shift that student back into learning brain. So for students who have experienced trauma, again, about 60% of them. Stress, the whole thought and feeling concept of stress is very rigid. It feels very threatening and exhausting, rather than more of a healthier stress, positive stress mindset, which would perceive stress as a potential challenge that they could embrace and grow from. As those stuck in survivor brain have an extreme difficulty with processing ambiguity, stress itself can become like a snowball rolling downhill, picking up weight and speed. Okay, so emotionally, okay, we're still at the prefrontal cortex here. Bear with me, I get really excited about talking about the brain. The medial part, both the dorsal and ventral areas, are very much involved in, like I say in the course Minecraft that Dr. Bongiorno brought up in the beginning, is the main theme is becoming the boss of our brain, and also it's about becoming in alignment. We want our insides to match our outsides, which is a whole lot easier when we're not in survival brain. It's not going to happen when we're in survival brain. So the student who's stuck in survival brain is not in alignment, and this is because the dorsal and ventral medial parts of the prefrontal cortex are involved with having an awareness of what's going on the inside, our internal states, and also sort of assessing or processing the personal relevance of incoming information. So think about that disconnect, okay? Not getting what's going on in here and not getting what's going on out there as far as how it pertains to me. So it's no big surprise when a student who's been through trauma loses their sense of purpose and direction, and their inner reality often becomes very distorted. So Bessel van der Kolk, if any of you have been interested in this topic of trauma, he's pretty amazing. He's one of the gurus out there for trauma education. And he calls this, I think you guys can see me out there, he calls this the mohawk of the self-sensing system. And here's why. We're kind of focused on students here, and this is also true for any of us who have experienced trauma and you're still in that place. So when a student is stuck in survival brain, they're going to be very, very apprehensive about trust. It's going to be difficult interpreting both verbal and nonverbal information. So, okay, and we're talking about neurotypicals too. So add into that someone who's neurodiverse, and it's even accentuated. Insight into their relationships may be distorted. They may also have decreased motivation to make and maintain friendships. Now think about this from a college student. It's all about friendships and relationships. And the student who's experienced trauma is at a real disadvantage here. Again, because they're out of alignment. They're also challenged with identifying their feelings. They may confuse frustration for anger, for example. So as far as faculty members or valued staff members, as far as what we can do here, the best way to keep students accessing their learning brain is to make sure that they're feeling as safe and supported as possible. So you might be saying, well, yeah, we've always done that. Okay, well, yeah, but it's different now. It's much, much, much different, because in addition to the 60% that have experienced another trauma pre-pandemic, now we have the pandemic. And so that's a trauma in and of itself, which means we need to amp up our game here. Excuse me. So you want to establish a culture of trauma-informed awareness, which is what we're doing now, and realizing that language-wise, it's all about voice and choice, because anyone who's experienced a trauma more than likely lost one or both of these before. Excuse me. So we want them to feel safe, welcome, supported socially, physically, and academically. And I'll tell you that in every course that I teach, I begin every single class with 1 minute of mindfulness, so we can clear out our working memories to invite the learning brain back in. Also relationships, even outside of our discussion here, we know from a positive psychology perspective, I'm thinking of the famous Harvard study right now, we know for sure the number one with longevity, living a long life, and optimal well-being is positive relationships. Obviously not toxic ones, that takes us backwards in another direction. But actually having people we can count on is the number one for longevity and optimal well-being. So what does this mean for us? So, again, faculty and valued staff working in admissions or student engagement or diversity and inclusion or whatever, running groups or activities, whatever, it means to expand our role. So I'm thinking in the classroom, we need to step out of, just looking at that student as a human being wearing a backpack coming in and realize that the whole student, their whole person is walking in that room with them. So to maybe expand our role, saying, especially with first years, right? Saying, how's it going? How's it going with making friends? How's it going with, fitting in and maybe, joining a club? And if they say, yeah, I joined this. Okay, well, tell me what that's been like. And maybe for a returning student, yeah, it's different this year, isn't it? Tell me how you're doing with that, and kind of jump into their lives a little bit and expand that role. Because we need to realize that, again, go back to the survival brain. If we're in a classroom, for an example, that whatever you have planned for that day is a waste of your intellectual and emotional energy if a student's in survival brain, because very little, if anything, is getting in, and what is getting is probably distorted. So even pre-pandemic, what I've done, let's say during midterms, when I walk in and there's this glazed look around the room, is I take 10 minutes, because I know nothing's going in, and we just do a go around. I might throw them a prompt, or I might just, when all else fails, just say, how are you feeling? Talk to me. And it might start it with, I'm overwhelmed on this. I have 17 papers and 36 tests, and then it goes around like that. And it's 10 minutes. They feel better. I often do an Okinawan breathing technique, which takes a minute at the most. It involves standing up and with a clap and big inhale, we welcome and invite whatever it is that's bothering them. That's a 3 count. And then we push out whatever's bothering them with the exhale. It gets them out of their chairs and into their bodies. It works well. You may chuckle at this one, but it works like a charm. Okay, we do the hokey pokey. And that's what it's all about. That's what I'm telling you. And the original soundtrack. So that is 3.5 minutes. And I also turn it on loudly. Again, gets them out of their chair and in their body. It gets them in their body. So maybe the first 5 seconds, it might be a little awkward. By second 8 or 9, definitely by 10, they're chuckling and laughing. They're having fun and they're in the moment. So here's a little bit of a brainy thing with that. By bringing them out of their up out of their chairs into their bodies and focusing on something, we're also activating the caudate, which is kind of right there in front of the limbic system, which also then deactivates the amygdala. So we're activating the caudate with the conscious effort, takes conscious thought, and by doing so, there's an immediate reduction in the limbic system activity, which means they have an immediate reduction of anxiety, at least temporarily. So huge. Out of the chair, in the body, reduce anxiety. Okay, we're doing well here. Okay, so how does trauma differ from big stress? So as far as the 60% of us who have had something happen, we're looking at the lady lion here. I think we know where she lands on the food chain compared to the rest. So the zebra is right or now, the amygdala flipped the switch, and the amygdala is saying, fight, flight, freeze. Freeze doesn't generally work out with the non-human animal populations, I think we know. So the zebra is, the sympathetic nervous system has her running. Okay, her heart rate's amped up. She's at DEFCON 4, trying to survive. Okay, now probably not happening, but we'll say theoretically, if the lady lion fell into a crevasse, it was covered with grass, or something larger came out of the tall grass and got her, again, probably not happening. And the zebra said, whoa, that was close, thank goodness. The parasympathetic nervous system would release endorphins and let her know that the threat's over now, you're safe, heart rate goes down, breathing mellows out, homeostasis is back. Okay, now since we know that isn't what happens, this is what happens. This slide that you're all looking at right now is trauma happening in front of your eyes. Even for the zebra, right? They're high enough in the food chain to get this. So trauma is happening right now in this moment because the mind, that zebra mind's ability to cope is being overridden. She is getting in this moment on some level that the fight, flight, or freeze plan are no longer gonna work. She can't run fast enough, nothing's gonna happen, and her biggest fear is getting ready to actually happen. So trauma is happening in this minute. Okay, so now something called dissociation happens. And this is a clinical term that's way bigger than what we can talk about today because it's complicated. However, what we need to just know for today in a short and sweet nutshell is that dissociation basically means that the mind or the psyche wants out. This is too much. Beam me up, Scotty. Get me out of here. Okay, and then deep dissociation. That zebra may still be alive barely, okay? And this is the ironic part because the sympathetic nervous system jacks us up to survive, right? We can hear better, see better, blah, blah, blah. The parasympathetic nervous system is meant to calm us down. So here's the thing. When we're in the severe dissociation mode, the parasympathetic nervous system actually kicks in and releases endorphins. So endorphins means actually, Greek derivation means internal morphine. So the endo is processed within, and Morpheus is actually a Greek god of dreams. So it kind of fits here. And I like to think of it as a mental hospice. If I'm going down and whatever my biggest fear was is happening, I may as well not feel it, or at least as much. So if it's you who's experienced trauma or a partner or a friend or sibling or whatever, and you've heard them say things like, I feel numb, even years after the fact, if it hasn't been worked through, or I felt like I was in a black hole, or I felt out of my body, they probably, in a sense, were. Okay, now this is the cool part here that has changed a bit. So it used to be event-based mainly, and I'm not saying just event-based. This is an add, don't subtract situation. So we have, witnessing or taking part in, horrible war atrocities and sexual assault, or, big car accident at 70 miles an hour, here it comes, or natural disasters, all of that. And now it's been expanded because we've realized that the effects of chronic trauma can be at least as bad as event-based trauma. So let's say clockwise, and you can see the coronavirus lingering behind there. We've got a young mother with this adorable baby, and she's representing right now food scarcity, housing scarcity. She might be going, 3 days at a time, having a place to live. When Maslow's hierarchy, if you're familiar with that, we can't do much without our basic needs being met. And if you have a baby, you have a little pyramid underneath you. And this chronic stress of not knowing where the next meal is coming from with a baby also and housing can have at least the effects of the event-based trauma. This young man, I just kind of picked him to represent neurodiversity in the workplace because he may be experiencing bullying for a long period of time where he's just kind of edged out of groups, edged out of potential promotions. It could be some blatant meanness that no one ever sees. Just like any other bully, the fifth grade playground bully or the workplace bully, they're doing the same behavior. We all know that they know who to talk to and they're silent, nobody catches them and all that stuff. That's what we're talking about. I have the military down here, and I'll say, disclaimer, I'm a big fan of our troops. However, it is a big organization and stuff happens in there, right? Racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, bullying, all this stuff, sexual assault, all sorts of things. We've got the bullying in the workplace up in the middle. I'm going to almost stay clockwise. And this little boy up here could be witnessing, domestic violence in his home. An older sibling could be making some really bad choices and hurting people in his house. Who knows? But he's witnessing it. It's all that matters. In the bottom left here, we have a situation of domestic violence. And it's important to say here that we often think of hitting. And obviously that's abuse and traumatic and terrible. And at the same time, there are plenty of abusive situations that don't necessarily involve physical abuse. And I'm thinking of years ago when teaching at CCV, we had it happen more than a few times, but I'm thinking of one particular instance. We had this young woman, top tier. She was trying to turn her life around and she was an A student. She loved being there. And then she just dropped off the map. And this is over in the Northeast Kingdom. So we got a few of our key players together and went to check it out. And sure enough, we got there to a very bad situation. And her partner, he was sort of posturing around and stood behind her. And it became very clear, as he was kind of verbalizing it, that he didn't want her going to college. He didn't want her bettering herself. He didn't want her to graduate because that would be a threat to him. It wouldn't be any place for him. If she betters herself, gets a college degree and gets a job she loves. And that counts. That absolutely counts, being under that thumb. And of course, the narcissistic gaslighting that goes on in so many homes as well. Then, of course, homophobia at school and in the workplace, that can linger on for a very long time and cause enormous damage. And then in the top left, we've got racism, which has been around, actually, to be specific, in this country, 14 generations. So racism in and of itself is trauma. And it's generational trauma, which means epigenetics are involved. So that means a mix of genes and environment for a very, very long time, kind of rolling from generation to generation. And so if any of you have heard or haven't heard of Resmaa Menakem, he is a trauma specialist. And by the way, all these references are on the end of this. So if you watch it later recorded, it's all there. His podcast is amazing. Trauma specialist who happens to be a man of color. And he refers to the generational trauma or the people of color that have gone through this generational trauma as bodies of culture. I love that. And he says because this generational trauma of racism actually manifests in the body. It actually manifests there, for, again, generations and generations. And then he talks about himself. He says, just being a Black baby born into a country that's white run and dominated, where many people perceive white people or the white race, or however you want to say it, as being superior, that in and of itself is trauma. It's trauma all by itself. So in the background, you have to see the corona or the COVID-19 virus. So think about the 60% of all of us who have had some sort of trauma by adulthood. Then we have the pandemic. And now we have the recent, because it's been going on forever, right? Recent upsurge of racism. And that is just our students of color and faculty of color and valued staff of color and parents of color have way more to contend with. Okay, this leads us to the pandemic mind and pandemic body. I actually just did another webinar on this. So because cortisol is meant to stay in the body for 3 hours, because most traumatic events or dangerous situations are over within that amount of time. It's meant to be there for 3 hours. When it stays there for longer than 3 hours, it's like a semi-automatic weapon just firing away at healthy neurons, especially in the hippocampus, which houses long-term memory for the most part. So I've been joking around lightly with me, with saying, oh, it's blame it on the pandemic brain, even though at 55, I can certainly walk into another room in the house and not remember why I walked in there, for sure. And if you've listened to a lot of people out there, they've been talking about this fogged over feeling, just this general fogged over feeling. And the rest of it too is that we can have a surge of what if thinking, which is obviously anxiety. What if I lose my job? What if I already lost my job and I don't get hired back? What if my friends lose their job? What if, let's say I have young children and teenagers home also, and we're halfway through September and the schools close again and I have to juggle teaching online and working virtually and not being at work and financial insecurity, whatever, catastrophizing, the depressed feelings of helplessness, especially over not being enough, not just as professors and valued staff, but also as parents. And actually that webinar I did recently was actually on how to be a good enough parent or in this crisis. And they had a lot to say, let me tell you. We're flying around trying to be everybody's everything to the best of our ability. Pandemic body. Cortisol also wreaks havoc on the body, especially with metabolism. So that quarantine 15 is not just about boredom. I'll tell you that right now, because cortisol messes with metabolism because it messes with the hormones ghrelin and leptin, which are the hunger hormones for feeling that hunger feeling and then the satiated feeling. And add into that the sleep disruption, which also affects hunger. And then obviously the immune system gets beaten up, which is not really what we're looking for in a pandemic. Okay, so it's part 3, we're almost done here. Part 3, trauma and scarcity. What is the relationship? There's a huge relationship. And I'm sure that most of you can relate to the toilet paper going missing, right? And memes about it and everything, and also paper towels. And I will share with you, well, actually, this is another book on the references. The Scarcity book is great. I will share with you that the toilet paper going missing is about a whole lot more than toilet paper. For some, it may have been about toilet paper missing, but here's the thing: there are way more ways, or more ways to have scarcity than money. And then it also touches poverty in general in a big, huge way. So in bottom left, you can see this child's sneakers. And so in addition to the not enough money and poverty, maybe generational poverty, the shame, embarrassment, and humiliation that some kids go through having to go to school with shoes like that and being teased or not the right brands and all of that. And actually, I have a very good friend of mine and colleague who has shared with me. She's super successful now, both as a person and as a professional. And she used to talk to me about, tell me about popcorn night, because she grew up so poor. And her parents used to have to tell her sometimes that popcorn's all they had for dinner that night. That was it. And she told me that once that went on for 3 days, and they didn't say a word. They just kept rolling. Well, enter a pandemic, and enter all this frenzy, mass at the grocery store, Cloroxing, shopping carts, fear-based energy everywhere. It's no big surprise that the toilet paper went missing. Job scarcity, if you see the young man up in the top right there, that may trigger, a job loss of one of the parents growing up, or his own, scarcity of that. The bottom right, if you grew up in an addicted home, which is also 40% of people, okay, such as I did, I grew up in an addicted home, there can be a scarcity of love, and that's along a spectrum. It may have been conditional sometimes, unconditional. You may have had some love, but it was intermittent. You may have had some love, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't all that you needed. There could be a scarcity of positive self-esteem building that kids need to learn about who they are, with all that mirroring and what you're good at, and all that positive about you. And one of the biggies is a scarcity of honor. That's a big one. It's no big surprise that a lot of careers that involve uniforms and helping there's a lot of attraction of adult children of alcoholics to those professions. Not saying that they all are, but it's a huge attraction. And then up in the top left here, we've got young Ruby Bridges at 6, just trying to go to school, okay? So we mentioned how racism is a huge trauma in and of itself. And now with relationship to scarcity, there can be a scarcity of equality, a scarcity of justice, a scarcity of safety, and also a scarcity of insecurity, an inherent insecurity at 6, that you should be able to walk through a door to school without U.S. Marshals escorting you. So all of this has us flying around as superhumans, not only as professors and, again, valued staff and parents. I've heard a lot from parents lately, trying our best to be good enough parents, as Donald Winnicott said back in the 50s, and feeling like we're not enough. Good people are championing this thing in every way they know how, and feeling like they're not enough. I'd say if there's ever a time to cut yourself some slack, it's now. Trying to teach kids online, trying to work virtually or not work at all and have all that stress, trying to take classes on night maybe as an adult at night. Lots going on. Okay, and lastly, with the scarcity thing, this article is also on there. It was particularly about mothers. In addition to everything else that grown-ups are dealing with, grown-ups are, this is again specifically moms, grown-ups or mothers of color. This article is about, in addition to all the other parenting issues, having to also kind of identify with the role of trauma surgeon and having the quote unquote, the talk. So from the ground up, mom and dad or mom and mom or whomever are having these lovely talks about, honey, we love you more than anything. You can be anything you want to be. You're so smart. You're so artistic. You're so athletic. You're so kind. You're so giving, filling them up and over the top with self-esteem. And then at some point, having to have the talk with this child who's full of love and saying, honey, here's the talk. Mom and dad, again, or dad and dad or whomever, love you inside out, upside down, and will give you both lugs and both kidneys. And the world may not love you back. And being a mother of 5, I cannot even fathom having that conversation. So very, very aware of my own white privilege there for sure, because I can't imagine it. And the rest of the talk is about, when you inevitably get pulled over by the police, whether you did anything wrong or not, make sure there are certain things you do and don't do. One of these is make sure you have your school ID or driver's license or both on you. Make sure to never reach into your pockets without the permission of the officer. Do not raise your voice. Do not say anything that could be misconstrued as any kind of sass or anything disrespectful. And then they go on to explain how many ways this can go badly. And so once again, in addition to what most of us are dealing with out there with previous trauma, now the pandemic, starting college, it looks way different than it has ever looked ever. Whether you're first year or you're senior or you're somewhere in between, or the faculty or the staff, it all looks different, or you're the parents worried about everything going on in the dorm. Now we've got our students of color, faculty of color, staff of color, and parents of color having to deal with even more with all the current racism surge going on. And that's just got to be overwhelming. Thank you for coming.
Kim, thank you so much. Kim has agreed to stay on a few more minutes and take some questions, and I am going to facilitate that. And if you want to ask any questions, please use the Q&A, and I'm able to see that and can relay 2 or 3 questions. And as people are thinking, Kim, I knew I was going to facilitate this, so I have a few questions.
Okay.
I'll throw out one. How early should we be reaching out to our college students right now? I feel like I'm working with faculty thinking about the first week of class, and as you were talking, I started backing up to orientation, and then I started just saying maybe I should start hosting some virtual lunches like I do during the school year. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yes, I happen to know about the famous Laurel lunches, and that is a fabulous way to go because it's informal and it gives them a chance to talk without feeling like it's class. They can just share, throw some prompts out there. I would definitely encourage that. And I think it would be a really good idea to work that into orientation. And if that's not possible at this late stage, perhaps something that's, short and sweet so that they'll pay attention along the lines of what we're doing, but more give just to them ahead of time. Absolutely. Just to validate this is different. No coming in, it's different.
So Kim, folks are wondering if you mentioned a lot of resources. Is there a way that people can access the resources that you've mentioned today?
Yes, they are all there on the, actually I'll show you. Okay, so this is being recorded, and so I don't know how long it'll take the brainy tech wizards to get the link up for everyone. I think it'll be on the Champlain College View site, and you can access everything I talked about. Trust me, as a professor, no plagiarism. It's all there, and you can access that at any time. And also, my email is here, so feel free if you we're looking where to go with that. Just send me an email.
So Kim, there's a couple more I'd love to have you address. One is, what might students be able to do to better support one another during this time, and especially during an online or remote atmosphere?
Oh my gosh, connection and conversation. I'm such a big fan of that. Connection and conversation. Obviously, this is a little better when there's somebody just orchestrating it, leading it, to get them rolling, to ask. I mean, when all else fails, you can do it with Zoom. You can do it anonymous when somebody's leading it, so that if somebody wants to ask a question, they can send it just to you so that no one needs to know who it came from. And then just answer and have the students. I've had great luck with that when I run defense against the dark arts. Then once you get the ball rolling, it just goes.
So Kim, people are wondering if you would put that reference slide back up for a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, there's 2 of them. There's actually 2 of them, but you can,
If you do them one at a time, that'll be
Oops.
helpful.
Okay, there's the second one is shorter. Let me just see what's on the second one. Oh, never mind. There's some good ones on there. There's mindfulness in trauma, which is actually a book I've used in a class. There's some, it's all good. I don't use junk.
So another question, can you recommend activities to help students feel safe with many courses going online? For many students, this was not how they prefer to learn.
Oh wait, can you say that again? I heard that.
Yeah, how do you help the students feel safe with this new online learning?
Okay, so feeling okay, so they're safe virtually. So we're not talking about in the classroom safe.
Yeah.
Once again, I'm a big one for, I'm an action person. So I kind of would jump right in before school starts because that'll be a huge anxiety reducer. And maybe do a run through with an activity that's not threatening as far as how to use everything and navigate Google Chats or Zoom, something that's just get to know you. And maybe they can like bring a pet to the meeting day. You know, we've done that at Champlain. And then maybe have them share a picture, a photo of themselves, because then you can use share screen and it's fun for them. They're not getting a grade, so there's no pressure whatsoever. That would help them, you know, kind of get it down before they come in, and how to mute and all that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have done practice sessions with students that don't count, right? Come on 30 minutes in advance. And just like we do, Kim, right?
Yeah.
Just like we do before webinars.
Yes, exactly. And actually, well, when you said that just now, also, because obviously we're familiar with our own crew, I would really strongly encourage faculty at whoever's listening, wherever colleges and universities you're from, reach out to them, delegate to do the same thing. Come up with bring a pet day. It works like a charm. In one class, I had flying squirrels and turtles, and they love it. And it's a way for them to navigate it before it counts, like before it's a grade. It's a really good way to go.
Yeah. So I'm going to wrap up in just a sec. There's one person who's asking for some particular advice that I'm going to say, you know who you are, and use Kim's email because she will connect with you. And then the final one, can you give 2 tips, since we're focused on tips, for doing mindfulness in a remote class, asynchronously, not synchronously?
Yes, I can. So there's one, actually there's a good TED talk on it. It's called Water, Whiskey, Coffee. Whoever's listening to me right now, I can send it to you. I can give you an easier one that's easy. Okay, so see my hand? There's one called Take 5, which I could do if I was facing the other way a little better. But basically, I'll do it this way. Basically, you breathe in and out. In and out. In, out. In, out. In and out. So that's called Take 5. Works for young children, teenagers, grown-ups, because from a brain standpoint, that's an immediate reset of the bringing the mind back into the body. And another one you can do is come up with some kind of activity that activates the cingulate, which is the band around the limbic system. So basically, that's anything that involves conscious thought. So for an individual, counting on its own won't work because the brain knows how to do that. So you'd have to go like count backwards from 200 by 7s. So if you were in a classroom situation, you can do that with them by maybe naming the presidents in a row or something. It has to take conscious thought, or whatever your topic is. Use you can actually build that into your class, something that takes effort, and that will work too. I have so many mindfulness techniques. I have tons. Email me.
So thank you, Kim. I want to tell you in the Q&A, there were a lot of comments that were thank you for the content, thank you for getting so much into half an hour, and I'm going to say, working so closely with Kim, again, email her. She will get back to you. She loves to talk about this, and she is just full of great ideas to work with our students. So Kim, thank you so much, and everyone who joined, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. It was a pleasure.